for the 20th century, the National Portrait Gallery has really tried hard to include many, many more women artists. The reason why in England we get few women artists until the beginning of the 20th century is because they were not allowed into the live classes to draw the nude in their training. Dame Laura Knight does this wonderful defiant self-portrait of herself in 1913, not just with one nude, but actually with two, to prove that women are capable of studying from the life model and able to make these great pictures herself. This picture was absolutely derided when it was exhibited, and Dame Laura becomes the first member, the first full member of the Royal Academy for 200 years in the 1930s. And then on the other side, we've got a wonderful example of the Bloomsbury movement, Vanessa Bell. This is her image of her sister Virginia sitting knitting in a chair. But again, the Bloomsbury group were looking to France, to people like Cézanne and Van Gogh for their inspiration. So we have very little detail in the image of Virginia's face. It's much more about this kind of flat colour. It gives us, it evokes a mood and kind of quiet contemplation of the sitter there with her knitting. Graham Sutherland, Winston Churchill. If any of you have watched The Crown, you may remember that Winston Churchill, for his 80th birthday, is presented with a portrait by a fashionable young artist, Graham Sutherland. The painting was given with much fanfare in Westminster over here. You can see Winston Churchill giving his lying speech, saying how grateful he is. The painting was, of course, absolutely hated and at some point was destroyed. Churchill himself said that he looked like a down-and-out drunk who has been picked out of the gutter of the Strand. This is a colour reproduction. Of course, the thing is now lost forever. It's rather a wonderful portrait, in my opinion. We've got Churchill sort of looming out of his chair, elderly, but still strong and still, with very much to say. The National Portrait Gallery has on display at the moment a study made by Sutherland of this image. The House of Windsor in the 20th century, I think these paintings really show the direction that the royal family wanted to show themselves and how they were portrayed. So in the earlier picture of 1913, we've got George V, Queen Mary, Princess Mary, and this is going to be Edward VIII, who, of course, runs off with Wallis Simpson and becomes the Duke of Windsor, in a very grand interior in Buckingham Palace. The king is slightly apart from the rest of his family. Here he is, not only as, of course, father, king emperor, father of the nation, king emperor, but also, father of this family with him. Very, very regal and sort of dignified and all of that. When we look at the picture of, this is our young Queen, Queen Elizabeth II as a young woman, Princess Margaret, Queen Mother, and her father George VI. There's this move towards domesticity, this move away from the grandeur that we get in Lavery's gorgeous painting, very imperial, to Gunn's much more, sort of intimate idea. The conversation portrait, which is basically a term that's used for groups together, very often at a tea table in the 18th century, is being explored in this image. We've got a rather nice image of George IV by Lawrence actually hanging over the mantelpiece, we can see there. And then, kind of coming up more up to date, we got very beautiful image, I think, of Diana when she was still Lady Diana. So it was painted in between her engagement and marriage. And what Brian Organ, the artist, has done is he's given us an idea of this kind of rosy teenager with cross legs, which is not how the royal family are normally portrayed. It refers to a famous Gainsborough. She's also not in a skirt, of course she's in trousers, and then, of course, sitting sideways on the chair. So all these very gentle subversions of how royalty is being normally portrayed. And of course, when we look back at it, we can see, and when we look at it with hindsight of today, it does rather look like she's in a gilded cage by the way that he's put the, I think it's the yellow drawing room at Buckingham Palace, these kind of geometric structures around her. And then rock and roll royalty. There's so much in the 20th and 21st century. So these two images, I thought, two very different portrayals of two great British pop icons. So on the right, we've got Elton John. This is painted in the 70s. 1970s in England was not a great time. There were strikes and 4-day week and so on. But you wouldn't know it to look at Elton John here at his, very kind of greatest personification with his, hugely exaggerated costumes, fantastic costumes. The artist, Susie Malin, has actually given the background this kind of gold ground with angels, which refers back to kind of early Renaissance images. We've even got you see the two angels crowning him above his head. And then we have the idea of, kind of angelic wings coming out of his costume. Wonderful things, confidence and bravado, captured beautifully. And then we can compare that to poor old Paul Amy Winehouse, made by Marlene Dumas, who's a South African artist working, I think, in Holland now. But she very often uses imagery from newspapers, newsprint, and so on. And this was made after Amy's tragic death. It's cropped, so it's really, really claustrophobic. But of course, we can see straight away that it's Amy with her characteristic makeup and this kind of constricted world that she found herself in at the height of her career. Absolutely hounded by the press. So very moving image. Oh, and another wonderful image is Malala Yousafzai, who won a Nobel Peace Prize, of course, was shot by the Taliban as a child at her home in the Swat Valley. Father was a teacher. She had been agitating for education for girls. After her attempted murder, she comes to Birmingham in England, where she is treated successfully. She stays in England with her family to complete her education, goes off to Oxford, and then, as I say, this wonderful kind of agitator for women and girls' rights, and so on. The image itself is by an Iranian-born, I think she's based in the US now, photographer who took a number of images of Malala and then has superimposed over the face this calligraphy, a poem by a Pashto poet. The poem actually talks about historical Malala, Malala in the 19th century who had driven out or tried to drive out the English from Afghanistan. So these two Malalas sort of superimposed together. And Shireen Neshat says, I knew of Malala as an extraordinary young woman. And when I look back on our encounter, I am left with impressions of humility, wisdom, and a rare sense of inner beauty. It's a gorgeous image. Sam Taylor Wood, as she was, is now probably most known as a movie director, but she uses video art in her images. This is one of my favourites. This is David Beckham, who I think is now resident in Miami. In any case, he was our kind of great footballer in the 1990s, married Posh Spice and all of that. David, the name David, of course, in the context of art refers to those beautiful Renaissance sculptures and so on. David Beckham had been working after playing football. Sam Taylor Wood had videoed him while he was sleeping. So we get the idea, the name David, but we also get David Beckham, who's usually, kind of moving fast on a football pitch, here absolutely silent and asleep. This is an example of the National Portrait Gallery's outreach programme. So you can see the figures here that are looking at it. This is actually from Whipps Cross Hospital in East London. Whipps Cross is where David Beckham was born. And they very often will send out historical and contemporary images to various sites around the UK. And then to finish with is one of my favourites. It was unveiled recently at Glastonbury Festival. It's by the great Sir Peter Blake, who is our great English pop artist. He is most famous, I suppose, for Sgt. Pepper Lonely Heart album cover for the Beatles. But he uses these bright colours, these very kind of clear outlined images. And he is a great friend of Michael Eavis, who, of course, established the Glastonbury Festival at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. Michael Eavis apparently turned up at the posh London restaurant where he was meeting Blake to discuss this image in his farmer shorts. And that's what Peter Blake decided to include in this image. And Michael Eavis is shown here as such a joyful man standing in front of the famous pyramid stage with one of his dairy cows. So going to the National Portrait Gallery, it's always really interesting to see not only the historical pictures, but the new commissions and how artists with their often with their relationships with the sitters, kind of shines through in these glorious images.